I'm Luke Kennedy with the McCain Institute, and you're in the arena with leaders and citizens who are taking character-based action. Well, we're very honored today to have in the arena Ambassador Tacan Ildem, who is the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy at NATO. He's had a lot of top positions, and he's in Washington, D.C. for the 70th anniversary of NATO. And I think that's our logical start place, but I'm not going to start quite exactly where you might think. You're much younger than NATO. NATO's 70. But what has NATO meant to you personally before we get to what NATO 70th means to you and to a lot of us?
Well, first of all, coming from Turkey, I remember my childhood with all the challenges, difficulties, threats emanating out of the Cold War years. And as a child, I was taught how important it was for Turkey to join NATO. And Turkey joined NATO in 1952. And it was also symbolic in terms of the Western orientation of the country. And since then, Turkey has become a very loyal and important ally within the alliance. So for me, NATO has always been a very strong point of reference. And lucky enough, in my long career, and 2 days ago, I completed 41 years in service.
That's impressive.
It was gratifying to see my country playing an important role in such an important alliance. And we have to see that NATO has been the most successful alliance in the world. First, what NATO could achieve in making our citizens, and we are talking about 1 billion citizens of NATO countries, right now 29 nations, soon to be 30 with the accession of the Republic of North Macedonia.
Right.
To make sure that our countries are protected, our citizens are safe, and our countries sharing the same values to be proud with the notion that one is for all is for one. It is such a sense of security and confidence. If we were successful as an alliance, it was because of the strong transatlantic bonds. Allies from North America, allies from European continent, working together in unity and cohesion, in solidarity with each other.
So let's talk progress, and I kind of think of it in terms of dimensions of progress. I mean, mankind progresses. I like to think NATO's been around 70 years, but I think for some people, and maybe I'm thinking of kind of the American viewer or listener here, they think of NATO as maybe quite static and, defensive. I'm not so sure that's quite the right way to think about it in today's world. So you can talk about progress and points of progress that maybe the average American just wouldn't have had a chance to catch up to.
Well, first of all, we have to remember what NATO has served as a security alliance. It's a political and military alliance during the Cold War. But even after the Cold War, when we remember what had happened with the 9/11 terrorist attacks, it was the first time that NATO allies invoked Article 5 of the Washington Treaty. And it is for the first time ever that Article 5 was invoked, and allies, shoulder to shoulder, fought in Afghanistan to make sure that Afghanistan does not become a country, a safe haven for terrorists to operate against the security and safety of our citizens. We could be able to manage the enlargement of NATO with those countries who wish to join NATO, with the aim to not only sharing the principles and values that we all share, but also contributing to shared security. They took part in different operations and missions. Another important thing is that NATO is not a static organization, but always adapts itself.
Right.
Let us remember also 2014, a watershed year when Russian Federation annexed illegally and illegitimately Crimea and initiated aggressive actions in eastern Ukraine. And NATO decided to suspend its practical cooperation with Russia while maintaining dialogue, but at the same time took a number of measures. Since 2014, with Wales Summit meeting and the 2016 Warsaw Summit meeting and 2018 Brussels Summit meeting, it adapted to the new security environment with complex challenges. Not only the assertive and aggressive Russia, but also with hybrid and cyber threats, with all the emerging challenges that we face. NATO has adapted itself to respond to the new security environment.
So you talk about how NATO has adapted. I kind of brought up about primarily known as a defensive alliance, which that aspect hasn't really changed, but you were generous enough to spend time with a wider visit at the McCain Institute today, and I heard you talk about how NATO is really interested in putting effort in strategic anticipation. That struck me. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Well, I think when you look at the work of NATO, when we talk about these adaptation, it comes with a number of reform process. The latest being the adaptation of the command structure. With the new command structure and the commands which were created, we are focusing more on military mobility, the readiness of our forces, reinforcement of our forces, and at the same time what is needed is to increase our situational awareness when it comes to instability in our neighborhood. So the fundamental pillars of our work is first to strengthen our deterrence and defense. And when we talk about Russian Federation, which I alluded to earlier, it is a dual-track policy that we are implementing with strong deterrence and defense on the one hand, and also a meaningful dialogue with Russia. But the second pillar is projecting stability beyond our borders, which requires us to strengthen our situational awareness so that we could have a better idea about the instability in our neighborhood, to engage with a number of partners to build their capacities and strengthen them, be it in terms of giving advice, assistance, and training their forces. When we deal with the existing challenges, and terrorism is one important one, it is the best way to engage with our partners so that they could be equipped in their capacities to deal with these challenges themselves. And when our partners are safe, our neighborhood is safe, we are more secure.
So shifting gears a little bit, I think important for people to catch up how NATO nowadays is engaging with partners to think ahead strategically, anticipating, if you will. But you're responsible for engaging publics in general, a pretty monumental task when you think of the wide array of publics that you have to think through. And I know that has you traveling widely. But I'm just observing what you're doing here in Washington. Tomorrow there'll be this event, NATO Engages. And I'm struck, NATO is known to be able to have a conference and to be able to pull people together, but this is not at the normal venue. This is on the waterfront in Washington, D.C., at a venue where I have to admit before I heard, I'm like, wait a minute, that's where rock bands go to play. That's not where NATO goes, but that's where you're going to be tomorrow. So It seems like you're getting creative on how to reach publics.
Well, it is true. Last year at Brussels summit meeting, NATO supported a consortium of partners, Atlantic Council, German Marshall Fund, and Munich Security Conference in organizing NATO Engages event, which brought together not only the expert community with well-known figures, but also young generation and women. And I think when we have the regular pollings in different allied nations, what we see is that there is a lack of knowledge in young generation, women, and less educated people.
Right.
So in our communication strategy, we try to engage with those segments of the society to better inform them about what NATO stands for, what are our values, why defense spending is important, the importance of Article 5 of the Washington Treaty, the solidarity, cohesion, unity among allies, and it is worthwhile to reach out to these segments of our publics to increase awareness about what we do. And this time in Washington, D.C., the selection of the venue is also indicative of the creativity as part of the preparations, and we very much support this endeavor which was undertaken by the three partners in consortium, but there are also institutional partners, and I know that McCain Institute is also taking part.
We're a very proud partner. I think for me, as a former NATO spokesman, I'm just struck by, this isn't your grandfather's NATO. You probably should know what, NATO meant to your grandfather, but you need to know kind of what NATO means right now. And I think it's great to see you reaching out that way, and you having to reach out and reach publics at a time when there's a lot of disinformation and concerted disinformation out there. I mean, I have this article about authoritarianism and disinformation in front of me, but really that's something that NATO has to tackle as well, right? Disinformation, you have to worry about this.
Yes, more and more we are tackling it with more systematic ways and tools. It is part of a hybrid action, and we should be aware of those tactics put in place with combination of cyber attacks, and what we try to do at NATO is to strengthen our capacity in understanding the information space, to follow the hostile narrative so that we could see which myths are being used, which fake news are spreading in the information space, so that we calibrate our communications. But I don't think that tackling the issue with reactive lines and with sort of responding to some of the allegations is the only way to deal it in an effective way. What we should do is at the same time to make sure that NATO's narrative is prominently featuring in the information space. Therefore, we try to address this information with a solid narrative of NATO to be in information space. And also, when you look at the NATO's website, you can see a portal named Setting the Record Straight, debunking all the myths that are being used by as part of the hostile narrative against NATO.
So truth and facts still have a very, very important place. Our time is short. I want to ask you. You served in Washington a number of years. Kind of a combination question. What's it like to be back? But then diplomacy and relationships, and maybe how Washington helped with that. But in general, what do you think of when you come to Washington, and what do you think of the state of play of diplomacy? Kind of hit you with two things at once there.
Well, I served in Washington from 1989 to 1993, and I could be able to see two different administrations. It was the Gulf War years, and Turkey being a staunch ally of the United States at a particular place, and being a spokesperson at that time, I could be able to interact with a number of prominent journalists, and it was a very interesting period for me. This is such a capital. You could see many things happening when you go to the Congress, interacting with professional staffers and staffers of different congressmen. You learn a lot, but at the same time you convey the messages from your country for them to better understand. For me, it was a very enriching experience. And as a spokesperson, I didn't have any difficulty in reaching out to people. They were always received me with utmost attention. And I also, at that time, was regular to different press institutions, having regular engagements with the editorial boards together with my ambassador. And the editorial board meetings were so useful to convey our messages. And we established a good network of people to work with, and they were calling us, picking up the phone, and trying to understand our perspective. And if there is anything to correct, we were reaching out to them. So it was a very two-way street, working to all of our interests. I am very happy to be here this time because it has a special meaning, 70th anniversary of NATO. NATO ministers will meet tomorrow and the next day, 3rd and 4th of April, to mark the 70th anniversary, but also to discuss important topics on their agenda. First and foremost, Russia, and we know that INF Treaty is in danger, and we want Russian Federation to return to full and transparent compliance. There is still time for them to make such a decision because what we have seen is that they unfortunately breached the rules stipulated in INF Treaty. I myself worked at that time when INF negotiations were conducted. I was at NATO at that time, and it was so good to reach an agreement between the Soviet Union and the United States in 1987. And I think it is one very important instrument. Although European allies are not signatory of INF Treaty, they benefit from this arrangement. And the decision of the United States this time, because of the deployments of the Russian SSC-8 system, to announce its intention to withdraw from this treaty is being supported by all allies, and they all make the plea to the Russian Federation for it to return to full and transparent compliance.
I think that's, to me, me personally, maybe to others, it's an important reminder. Maybe it shouldn't be, but it is an important reminder of just the serious issues, some being revisited, reformed, that are on the table. And I think, sometimes you can, because NATO, when it meets, the ceremonial aspects are very impressive and pervasive. So I think it's a very important reminder of the serious issues on the table. One final kind of standing question we have, and you can picture whoever you like as you answer this, but it's really more for an emerging leader out there. But I'm trying to think, what's the equivalent of someone like you as a young man, being told Turkey ought to join NATO, maybe having no real expectation then how central NATO would become to your life. What advice do you have someone maybe in kind of a similar situation right now?
Before I do that, I complete the answer that I was giving before this. It is
an effective ambassador gets his point across. Yes, please.
it is not only, of course, Russia that ministers would be discussing. Black Sea security would be on their agenda, countering terrorism and the existing security challenges, and also they would be discussing transatlantic bonds and fair burden sharing, which is an important topic with the spending, defense spending cut after the Cold War.
Right.
But now there is an increase by all allied countries, and in the last 2 years, $41 billion was added to what we have as defense spending, and by the end of next year, the number will be $100 billion. So.
So this idea that people haven't contributed more, countries haven't contributed more, is old news. I mean, the contributions have gone up substantially.
Yes. So it is an important message that our publics should know. And since 2014, with the Wales pledge, 2% of the GDPs of every country is the criteria, and within that, 20% to be allocated for new equipment, and allies are making an effort, so there is a good trend, and we need to maintain this, and there is a sense of urgency among all allies. Now, for young leaders, I have to say a few things. First, the security issues are so important for our countries. And there are a number of young, talented professionals who have an interest in security domain, and they are doing their contributions, because each time that we interact at meetings like NATO engages, and tomorrow I hope we will have yet another opportunity, we are so much impressed with their wisdom, and I can only encourage them to continue sharing their ideas with us. We also need out-of-the-box ideas, and their contributions are very encouraging and thought-provoking. Second important thing is for them also to guide those coming after them, to engage with them. If they are right now young leaders, they should also take the responsibility to mentor the coming generations. It's a process. I remember even at my young age, I was trying my best to reach out to those who were coming.
Bring others
after.
with you. Yes. Bring others along with you. Yes.
This would be important. And third thing is sometimes we neglect the importance of international organizations. NATO is one of them. We have internship programs. And I see many talented people coming to NATO headquarters with different skill sets. And they are tasked to be part of one division or unit at NATO. And you could see how talented, gifted they are. And they are so enthusiastically engaged to make a contribution to the work of NATO. So I strongly encourage them, if they are young, just graduated their universities, NATO internship is one possibility for them to expose themselves to an international environment, to work with people coming from different nations. It also strengthens your sense of belonging to this alliance, and also to share your own cultural baggage with others. And for that, I encourage them to see ways to first apply for the internship, which we have ample information on our website, but at the same time to look at the vacancies in our website and apply for those jobs that they think they could make a value
Realize
added.
those jobs are there for them. Well, what I'm hearing come through quite clear is get across the Atlantic, engage, which you're certainly doing, and we really appreciate your time. Thank you for being in the arena, and hope that you'll allow us to stay in touch, and perhaps you can come back, and we'd love for you to update us and to work with you in the future.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
This podcast is produced by Patrick McCann and Justin Kessler. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, tell your friends, or leave a review.